Let's begin. A function is a block of code that will run if its name is called. First, let's start with how to create a function. All you have to do to create a function is write def, then the name that you want the word that you want the function's name to be, then 2 brackets after the name, then a colon, and then click enter and write under it any code you want it to run, and make sure it's all indented. Then, if you want to call the function and make it go and make it active and run that code, all you have to do is write the function name and make sure that the brackets are there whenever you call it, or else it will not work. If you put any arguments also in the function's brackets, which we're going to talk about in a minute, make sure they're also included when you call the name. Now on to scope. The name of the range in which you can use a variable in a function is called scope. Now, variables and functions can normally only be used in the function that they were created, meaning that the normal variable scope is only the function it was created in. There are a few ways to use variables outside of their function, though, or outside of their usual scope. The most easy, most simple, but also flawed way is to use global variables, which when you make one will essentially just make its scope the entire program instead of it's just one function it was originally made in. The reason why I say global variables are flawed is because they make debugging a lot more difficult, because instead of just looking at one function, you have to look through the entire program to fix a bug because that variable is constantly changing. So instead of using global variables in your functions, but if you still want to use global variables, to make one, all you have to do is type global, then the variable name. And then you have one. Now, one better alternative than to global variables is a global constant, which is essentially a global variable, but you make sure that it's not changed at all throughout your code. You can make one by making it global at the top of your program, and then just making sure that it's not being changed at all in your code. Constants are better because they essentially nullify the debugging problem, because if the constant is a cause of error, you can easily fix it, because all you have to do is look at what the value it originally has and try and fix that, because it's supposed to never change. You can also use return, which I explained which I'm going to explain now, which I'm going to explain in a bit, which is also a good way to use variables outside their function. Another way to use variables from other functions is to pass them into your function with arguments. The way this works is that you're essentially sending that value into the function, and you do this by, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, but not fully, typing the name of the variable you want to pass as an argument when defining your function in between the brackets. Once you do this, you can use the variable wherever in that function, but make sure to still write the name of the variable, as I said earlier, between the brackets whenever you call that function. This is a very good way to use functions as the type of variable, because you can use any type of variable with this, even lists. Now, another way to make the scope larger is returning. To return a value in a function below the line, the value you want to return to return a value in a function below the line of the value you want to return, just type return, and it will return the value. Now, returning the value brings the value back to where it was called, and this can be used to use variables inside of a function outside of its scope, as long as it's not global. I use this in my game, which I'll talk about a bit. You can also use a pass statement in a function, which isn't very useful, and it does the same thing as a loop, which basically just doesn't give you an error if it's an empty function. I just thought to mention this, but it is pretty useless. Now, on to why you should use functions, because you can get by just by coding normally, but I personally think functions are better mainly because they're a lot more organized, and I think making games with them are a lot easier because it's significantly easier to make start/game over screens, because all you have to do is call the function instead of indenting huge amounts of your code in an if statement, like you would normally do if you didn't use functions. Now on to where I use functions in my game. My whole game is organized in functions, so let's start with my first one, which is just a function that creates the gap between the pipes and also appends them into a list. It's just a basic function, though, and doesn't have any passing or returning. Now, my next function is a draw function, which first of all, it passes the bird y variable, which is created above it, into the function. so that the function can edit the bird Y, meaning that it allows the function to move the bird. And this variable includes a large amount of this function includes a large amount of my game, including blitting all the required images into my game, having a loop to create the pipes on screen and remove them. It also handles looking for the user input, which is the spacebar to make the bird move up and down, and also the Pygame quit button, so if you click that, it makes the game close. It also makes the game over screen appear, it does this by calling the game over function, which I'm going to talk about a bit. If you go to the top of the screen, it also makes the bird constantly fall, and also makes it, if you hit the pipe, it also calls the game over screen. And this function, though, does use the global game state, which is in all my functions. And I did talk about how you shouldn't use this, but I think it was just a lot easier doing the game over, game start screen, and game screen, just because it doesn't. There's not really many places there can be an error there, so I think it's a lot easier. Now my next function is the start screen function, and what it does is just split all the start screen words, and then it continually starts to look for the Pygame exit button. So if you click that, it'll close the game, or the backspace user input, and what that will do is it will close, and if you hit the backspace button, it'll start the game. Now this function does return the game state variable so that it equals 2, so that it can call the other function. It can call the game start function if the user does press backspace. Now my next and last function is the game over screen, which just displays game over text and looks for the user to input the Pygame exit variable so it can close the game. Now it does not do more than that right now, but I'm going to try and make it that it can restart soon. And thank you for listening to my video.